Hello, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. It is a tremendous pleasure to have Tuomas MALINEN. He is the CEO and Chief Economist of GNS Economics, also a adjunct professor of economics at the University of Helsinki. And he is one of the people that you must follow on Twitter and in LinkedIn. You will have all his details below in the description of the video. Great pleasure to have you here. How are you, Tuomas?
Thank you. Very nice to be here. I'm very good, thank you. It's been it's actually now it's sunny and warm also in Helsinki, so we're happy.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Talking from sunny Spain today, so it's beautiful. Tuomas, I think that one of the things that many of our viewers tend to be confused about is what is the real status of the economy in Europe, in the United States, in this environment of multiple stimulus packages and massive central planning and central banking monetary stimulus. Where would you categorize the situation of the economy right now and the main challenges that we're living?
I would say it's extreme fragility is where we are now. It's quite unbelievable that you two and we have been talking about the risks of the continuous stimulus for quite a bit of time. And now, past year, with after the corona hit on the economy, everything went on the overdrive. Like we know, like the balance sheet of the Fed has ballooned from around 4 billion to 8 billion. In just over a year, it's a massive increase of doubling the balance sheet. And all these, stimulus checks given out by the first the Trump administration, now the Biden administration, and also the massive fiscal deficits in US, both in US and Europe. So I think that we are living in unprecedented times in a sense that our economies have become completely dependent on the stimulus as well as the financial markets. And this is like I think 10 years ago, this would have been a bad dream for almost all economists. But I think it's really strange that many of our colleagues seem to be fine with this continuous monetary meddling and all the perverse things it creates in the economy. So it's just the one thing, how to categorize it. It's just extreme fragility and the chompification of companies and countries is just massive. I'm kind of a lack of words here because we are so far beyond any realm of former economic sense, very deep in the rabbit hole, if you may. So we are in a very, very strange and scary place.
Mm-hmm. And when you mention extreme fragility, what many people tend to forget is that the constant implementation of stimulus packages, both in recession and in growth periods, are generating all these perverse incentives that you mentioned that also create a domino effect afterwards, because central banks cannot normalize policy because bonds would collapse. And if bonds collapse, equities collapse. So it becomes almost like an impossible situation by which normalization of policy becomes almost a dream because it's not going to happen. No, what do you think is the solution that central banks can find to reduce these imbalances? Do you think that there's any actually?
No, it's just, we have two ways. Either we socialize everything, create the central bank digital currencies, and take over the monetary system and financial markets completely by the central banks, or then we let the system crash. There's no other escape. I don't see any other way out of this. Like if you just think about the Archela's capital management issue, which appeared, like, was it 3 months ago in March? Just in a sense that that bond started to, yield started to tick up,
Yeah.
And already there was one massive casualty, which Argelos basically failed due to a massive margin call. And then the losses to Credit Suisse were very high. So central banks are bankers are mortally afraid that they would need to raise rates because they know what kind of a domino effect would appear. And I don't really see that there's any reasonable way out of this. Many talk that we could in a magical way we could inflate our way out of this. But if you just think about just issuing an inflation tax over a large, like for example, let's say the U.S. population, the middle class, I don't think they would be very much happy, and it would impoverish many people, as we know. So central banks they are trapped.
When you look at the idea of inflating the way out of the recession that is constantly repeated, many people say, what's the problem with that? Because we have not seen quote unquote inflation with massive money printing in the past years. And now what we can do is generate a little bit of inflation, and therefore we reduce debt and we continue to grow. What would you say to those people? I obviously disagree with that.
Yeah, no, it's a fallacy. They live in an old world where to begin with, the debt levels were not so high. Yeah. Central bank balances were not so massive as they are now. So it will not be inflating everything. It will be taking over everything basically, and the inflation would need to run very high for a very long period of time, which I don't think the middle class would like to see that, because as we know, it's an inflation tax, essentially. If inflation runs between, let's say, 5 to 10%, it's a massive inflation and it will impoverish a massive number of people. So I think that's that's really a fallacy of a sort. It cannot be done in a sense. And also there's very good pointers have been raised recently, for example, in the Financial Times, about the kind of a triple mandate of the Fed, for example. It's that the price stability is the first one, then there's the unemployment, and then there's also the reasonable level of interest rates, which has been completely forgotten. Yeah. And I don't know, it's a dogma from an old world to inflate our way out of the debt. It cannot be done this time around.
I think that is a critical point, because people don't understand that in the current environment of low productivity growth, low GDP growth in periods of recovery, and low improvement of real wages, the inflationary pressures do not reduce debt. What you see is that deficit spending, because it actually goes higher. Therefore, what ends up happening is that you have more debt and the inflationary tax, which reduces consumption from. So I think that is one of the things that in this new sort of this time is different type of scenario that we hear one too many times, people tend to forget is that the inflationary pressure is not going to reduce the debt. It will hurt consumers, it will hurt margins of companies, but it is not going to reduce the elevated levels of debt. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. If we have to add the Trumpy corporations to that also, that the inflation will not help them. They will need to take more and more debt. And with the inflation pressures, I think their ability to operate would diminish considerably. So this is a massive issue. The central banks have kind of rigged the economy in a way that there is no easy way out. They're just very massive, like a really troubling options from here on. And the thing is that many also do not understand that the whole financial system almost collapsed a year ago in March. We were really close of a systemic meltdown. Yeah. And central banks put everything they got to save it. And you just wonder how many times they are able to do that. For example, the issues with the repo or the reverse repo of the Fed, when the banks and the counterparties of the repo markets are parking like hundreds of billions of dollars per day to earn a very little interest. They're parking basically their liquidity into the Fed. And as we see it, it may spell the end of QE in a sense that the US may be reaching some sort of a debt saturation, or debt saturation in the sense that the corporations and corporations and consumers are unable to take any more debt, or more debt on here. So there are massive issues within the financial system, which may be shots that the central banks cannot fix them. And if that's true, then we're kind of the end of the road of the whole model of central bank run economy. I think you and me would probably enjoy that thought, but it would scare many, because we would go back into the kind of laissez-faire economy where there would be more freedoms and on more responsibilities on corporations, banks, and consumers. But I think that's the road we're on. We are seeing the end of the kind of central banking era. Mm-hmm. That's my take.
That's a very interesting point, is that the idea that this has been going on for a long time, mm-hmm. For many people, tends to be ignoring the fact that what they view as a very long time is actually very little time, is a decade. Mm-hmm. And that a decade in terms of economic history means absolutely nothing. So thinking that this can go on forever is making a very, very large and misguided assumption about the sort of godlike abilities of central banks to sustain what I would say even the most benign view of the current economic system would agree is a very elevated level of risk. Because I think that what everybody does agree with is that there is high levels of risk being taken both in the corporate world and in the public sector. But that all of that can be sort of disguised by central bank policy. One of the things that is being mentioned is yield curve control. What do you think? What would you say to people that see that would be a very good idea?
I think they have been doing that for a while. Actually, what else is QE than yield curve control? Where do you control it? Just let it rise a bit and then try. At least the Bank of Japan has been doing that for a long time. So we are in it already, and we are very heavily there. And the thing is that not many people are really asking, which is a problem, is that how long can the financial system sustain the current level of central bank meddling? Like the problem in the repo market. So what are they really reflecting? How long are the banks going to allow the central bank reserves to build in their balance sheet, which comes forcibly when you conduct QE, because it forces the central bank reserves on the balance sheet of banks. It cannot go on forever. Yes. It stresses the banks. They yield very little. And in the past, banks have been able to increase the marginal benefit or correct the very low marginal benefit the reserves cause by giving out more riskier loans.
Yeah.
And now that road may be ending. And there's a point in a freely operating financial system where the liquidity the central banks are pushing reaches its limit. Like there's, for example, really strange, we've been hearing very strange things within the Finnish banking system. For example, banks refusing to take any more deposits. And the reason is basically because they have too much cash.
Interesting.
And this is a really strange thing. It's caused by the QE because it pushes liquidity, massive amount of central bank credit around the economy. And we may be reaching to the limit. And if we have reached the limit, then the system cannot take it no more, and you cannot control, nothing. Central banks cannot control anything at that point. So control the yield curve is also a fallacy, I think, which has been going on for at least 10 years. Yeah. And now central banks may be losing the ability to do that.
It's a very good point, what you just said, because many people, particularly those that defend current massive stimulus programs, what they tend to say is that this can remain at this level at least for a good decade. But what they don't talk about is the marginal effect, is that the current system requires that not just the purchasing programs remain, but that the marginal effect of those purchasing programs is also continued. That is, that it's not just that they will be able to continue to purchase bonds, but that it generates multiple expansion in high yield bonds, generates multiple expansion in equities, etc. That is the problem, is that yes, you may actually continue, but the diminishing returns of this policy are becoming more and more evident, not just at the macro level, but also at the financial level, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Because there's a threshold also on leverage. How long can you, how large can you make that? Like with the Bitcoin crash or the cryptocurrencies, we learned that they have been using leverage of 100 times. Just completely insane. I actually never heard of such leverage ratios. I couldn't believe those at first. And if you just suppress the yields, if you just push them down, they have to make the profit and the yield somehow, and that's just increasing leverage. But there's a point after which you cannot get any more debt from the system, marginal debt or whatever. So there are limits, and I think we're pushing against those limits already now.
Yeah.
So there is the marginal benefit is it can be we might be reach a point when it's already zero.
Yeah.
And it might be going negative. Mm-hmm. And after that, you cannot continue. You just cannot, because it will just tear the system apart from within.
Yeah.
And this is, and as you know, we both know we've never been here before. Mm. So we never seen the system fall apart from within. Well, the global financial crisis, of course, was some event of something that kind. But this would be a whole different thing. And a massive global and really like troubling thing where central banks couldn't do anything to fix it.
Yeah.
So we are in a very kind of, apocalyptic phase in the financial market, it seems. But it's truly the point that if the marginal benefit is gone or even turned negative already, then the road is, we're done.
Yeah.
Central banks, we're done with this road.
Yeah. And many people, when they hear these messages, they tend to believe that what we're going to go into is some sort of crazy environment that can be sorted out by moving from quantitative easing to direct money creation to finance government spending, the so-called MMT or modern monetary theory. You know, what would you tell these people that believe that the problem is that money is being printed, quote unquote, for the banks, and that what we need to do now is, quote unquote, print for the people?
Well, first of all, we have been in the modern monetary theory world for a while because of the suppressing of the yields. So governments have been able to borrow with very cheap rates. Like if you look at in Europe, it's would you borrow to Italy? What's the yield? It was something of 10-year note. It was something between, was it under 2, 1 point something? Would you borrow to Italy for your money 10 years with the yield of 1.5 or something like that? Would you?
No, absolutely not.
No, of course, no one wouldn't. Yeah. So we are in this kind of strange situation where none of these bond yields, for example, reflect the risk anymore. And to turn it away from that, governments could borrow from the financial markets, so they could borrow from the central banks directly. It would just make everything worse.
Yeah.
So nothing, and we know from historical examples that when that has happened outside wars, it has caused basically a crash in productivity growth. So it has ended because governments are so bad of distributing money efficiently, and it's not their job. They are not economists. They are not business leaders. They don't know how to run an economy. That's a fact. So it would just make everything worse. Of course, it's still possible. We could issue some kind of a helicopter drops of money, but we know already from US that it just creates a situation where people do not want to go to work anymore. So you created some strange, like a communist slave state with it. So absolutely not. It would be just, I think we have reached a point where we have to accept that the road we've been, at least, well, maybe 30 years since the Greenspan pot were kind of enacted after the October crash in 1987, that we have reached the end of that road, or very close to reaching that. And more central bank meddling through the giving out of going to these helicopter drops or issuing a retail central bank digital currencies will not fix anything. It will just make the problem worse. So I think we are on verge. Of course, there's the possibility, like we said, we've been saying, is that, central banks and governments can really make a union, and they control of the whole economy through the central bank digital currencies and the helicopter drops. But that would doom the economy altogether. Or then we can go back to the basics of our economic life, to more freedom and more responsibility by corporations and consumers, and that I hope we're going there to the freedom, because I don't think when people realize what has happened through all this government and central bank meddling, they don't want to go there anymore. So there will be a political backlash. And I think we saw something of that in late 2018, in December, when the markets were crashing in the US, and some commentators were already attacking the Fed. It was not President Trump just, but also other economic commentators were attacking of the Fed of creating the bubble in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think that will happen when this all comes crashing down at some point, as it will. And after that, people just don't want to give more power to the central banks to create even bigger problems. So I think this is a financial, economic, and political change towards which we're heading.
It's actually very important to understand that a bad monetary policy is not solved by a worse monetary policy, and that what people see today as negative implications of the system in general would be even worse with that direct monetization and helicopter money, because ultimately what you're doing is, you've said something that is very important, is that the collapse in productivity growth leads to massive reduction in real wages, and that's where people really get angry, because that's when you see that you get into Argentina territory, yeah. And I think that is a very, very clear risk. You've mentioned a couple of times central bank digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. First, I would like you to explain to our viewers why a central bank digital currency is dangerous.
Well, yeah, we're actually writing a piece on those, so I can just give an introduction, because I'm not so fully in it anymore yet. But the thing is that what we are talking about, the retail central bank digital currency, which essentially means that every one of us would have an account at the central bank. That's a basic principle. And when you first think about it, that could be a good thing in a sense that, there's a safe place to put your money in. But as a central bank, as we know, it's a supervisor, the lender of last resort, and basically the guarantor of the banking system at the same time. And if it would issue a own retail currency to all, it would become a competitor, and it would be complete corruption of the central banking model. And if you think what would happen in the financial crisis, not going into details of how the central bank system or digital currency system could be issued, but if we go into a banking crisis and you have a central bank digital currency in a retail form, that you have the access to the balance sheet of the central bank, there is nothing to stop a bank run from all the commercial banks to the central banks, as the central bank generally cannot fail, especially if it's backed by a fiscal authority. That means a treasury, basically, and all the tax income of the state. And at this point, central bank would just easily say that, okay, to the ailing banks that, okay, well, we will save you. We'll just give our deposits come to our, they come to our bank, and we bail out your, let's say, bondholders and such. And that would be it. And in the worst imaginable scenario, I was just reading an academic paper about it, you will find a situation where the whole banking system collapses and there's only one bank left, which is the central bank. This is the worst scenario. And that would be like the Ghost Bank. As you know, the Ghost Bank was the central bank of Soviet Union. And there is a thing that I'm just going in through the academic papers now, so I'm really not able to explain all the details yet, but they are planning some backstops from stop this not happening in a banking crisis. But the thing is that after central bank opens its balance sheet to all, it becomes a political decision what they do next. And there's nothing we can do to stop it working in a way. I think there's nothing we can do to stop it, to go in the point when if there are politicians panic in a banking crisis, central bank panics, they won't just open their balance sheet to all and invite all the deposits in. So if we create a retail central bank digital currency, I think it opens a door for complete socialization of the banking system. And if we go there, if we have one bank with all the money, then all kind of monstrous scenarios can be sketched. For example, if you look at what is happening in China, you get like those who criticize Beijing will get their funds freezed.
Yeah.
So if we would have every deposit under central bank, they could especially in a crisis situation, they could take such a big control over economy that you could be, punished directly from jaywalking, for example. So they could directly fine your, bank account, and all these kind of Orwellian dystopian scenarios open up. Mm-hmm. And like I've been living, I remember Soviet Union from my youth. So and on all the stories. So I know very well, as with every European, that you never cannot trust a government with full control of your life. That just doesn't lead to anything good. So that's why the central bank digital currency is a kind of a dangerous idea, not because what it gives, but what it opens door into. And we shouldn't really flirt with the idea of giving full control to central banks and the government over our economies. That's extremely dangerous.
Bringing the central bank, the lender of last resort, to be the lender of first resort, and government, the decider of where money creation needs to be directed, is extremely dangerous in itself, in an environment in which we have the knowledge that central banks have been unable to normalize policy even in growth periods, and have been unable to conduct independent policy decisions where governments have been interfering very aggressively in numerous countries. So thinking that a digital currency would eliminate all the backstops and all of the independence levels that existed before, and destroy the credit mechanism as we know it today, that at least has demand as something that stops the level of inflation to go through the roof, would be extremely dangerous. What do you think? Where do you think that cryptocurrencies get in, or how do they fit in this environment? What is your view?
Well, I think they are they are kind of the fighters of freedom here. So they're against the central bank digital currencies. Of course, there is such schemes planned that central bank would open the reserves to certain cryptocurrencies and create kind of central bank reserve-backed cryptocurrencies, which of course would annihilate the idea very idea of cryptocurrency or its origin, that it's free and created from some algos. But I think in this case, people who are creating cryptocurrencies are actually the champions of freedom here. So they are trying to create. If you look at the history of monetary system, if the money came to be as an accounting unit at the first place, and then as a debt. So if there's I would say it's they are part of the renovation of the monetary system. In a sense, we have to be careful how much trust we can give them. If you just look at the Bitcoin, for example, and how its value has been drifting and it's been very volatile, crashing and then rising. And of course, monetary systems cannot be based on any such of a unit of account which fluctuates so heavily. But the blockchain technology and all that, I think that's the future in a sense. And the more cryptos we have, the bigger pressure towards the central banks actually to not to take control of everything over our banking system. So they are, I would say, in a word, that they are freedom fighters in this sense.
It's interesting. No, so the idea would be that the very existence of cryptocurrencies themselves shows that to central banks that they need to be aware of their limits and work sort of competition that at least prevents central banks from going crazy, going gonzo on monetary policy. Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned as well is this is the credit mechanism destruction, no? And the point where credit takers simply don't have any more ability to take more debt, even if there is ample liquidity and low rates, no? Yeah. How do you explain to people this concept? Because I hear all sorts of theories out there saying that, Enron would have not collapsed if quantitative easing would have existed at the time and things like this.
Okay, well, that it's actually called, I think the term is debt saturation.
Yeah.
In very simple terms, it's a point where consumers or households and corporations refuse to take any more debt because they know that they cannot handle the debt. They can't pay it back. They are unable to repay it, considering their income and how they see it develop. So for example, what interest rates do, they just push the limit a bit further, but still it's there. And with the Enron case, well, I don't know, I'm not the expert on that, but maybe the QE could have pushed the failure of the company a bit longer, but would that have been a good idea? I would say not. Absolutely. So what the thing is to think about the QEs and the interest rate is that they have been pushing the limits of corporations and households to stand even against their ability to pay. So they have created a vacuum, if you may, of corporations and households which would need to fail in some sense to go into bankruptcy or debt restructuring, something like that, and pushing these limits further, making the companies even more indebted, the households even more indebted, is not helping anyone. It's just making the eventual and inevitable correction worse. So, no, it's a very bad idea. And I think it was very interesting that in the Financial Times article, the third mandate of the Fed to keep the interest rate at moderate level was raised, because that has not happened. I didn't remember there's such a clause in the law concerning the Federal Reserve, but I think that was there to ensure that the interest rate would not go very high or very low at any point. And the Fed has completely failed on that, completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Because definitely when you have negative real interest rates and when you have negative interest rates, it's a burden on savings, but it's also generating enormous incentives to take a level of debt that is therefore very difficult to repay or directly impossible to be paid, isn't it? I think that you mentioned before the concept of zombie companies. Yeah. A lot of people out there, when I speak about zombie companies, they say, well, Mr. Lacalle, what's the problem with a zombie company? A zombie company maintains employment, continues to be alive, and maybe in the future they can become more productive. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, it's the job of a corporation to increase profit, but to create profit. And if you consider in a situation where you have some project that doesn't really generate anything good, it just exists there so that you can keep your workers and your capital, and you know that there might be a better project around. So what does it help to keep the one failing project alive? It ties the capital, it ties the employment. Workers are engaged in a project that is not going forward. It's not beneficial for them. So it would be better for all to let the project go or the company go and create something else for the capital and workforce it releases. And the thing is that when these zombie corporations increase in the economy, if they fail in mass, like we have been warning for close to 2 years now that might happen, then you see massive unemployment, explosion of unemployment at the same time. When if these projects or companies fail at let's say when they should in an expansion, the workers can get they easily can get rehired. But if it all happens at once, then we create a really dire economic situation which will hurt all. So economic is about dynamism or dynamics. Economy needs to go forward all the time, and companies need to fail, projects need to fail, workers need to go to other places to work, re-educate themselves. That's how the world works. We are going forward. And that requires kind of this constant loop of failure and success. And if you take away the failure, the successes will also diminish. And then we come to a point when the economy can implode because there is too much failure accumulated in the system.
Yeah. One of the things that I always tell my students is, what do you think happens to an economy if you consistently increase the taxes on the success and you consistently subsidize failure? What do you think happens to your chances? My students are not working yet. Your chances of getting a job. What do you think that happens to the chances of your 50-year-old or 60-year-old uncle or father losing their job? Because that is the problem. The problem you just mentioned beautifully is that the concept of creative destruction is precisely the positive, is that it generates the dynamism in the economy that allows new workers and new people to get a different job, and those businesses that fail to be substituted by others. But when you subsidize everything to keep those zombie companies, then they will also fail at the same time. And that can generate a massive unemployment situation, particularly because you mentioned as well, productivity growth is not happening, no? And people forget that real wages and productivity growth go together.
Like they have gone through like 250 years or something like that. All through the period, we have had this industrial revolution and fast growth. So it drives the productivity growth, drives our economic growth. That's the very fundamental thing. And with that, you can increase it for a while, but everything will return to the level of productivity growth, as you know. But this is something that central banks have completely messed over. They have created turmoil. People don't understand where the economic growth comes anymore.
Yeah,
that's where the MMT and all these really dangerous theories come from. Also, that we don't need it. We can generate it by ourselves. No, it comes from the productivity growth, and we know from research and we know from history that it comes from private actors taking risks, taking profits, failing, and that's how it goes. It has always gone on land, and it should continue to go like that. And we have reached a point where it doesn't really happen because of central banks and the government support.
It's a very important point. You mentioned before how government's role is not to pick winners and losers, and even less so to drive productivity growth, because it doesn't have more or better information than the private sector, and it has all of the incentives to overspend and obviously to try to defend whatever exists right now at the expense of the future. But I think that also an important factor there is that governments are extremely bad at picking winners, and even worse at picking losers. Is that the government will inevitably prefer to defend whatever is existing right now, in order to so-called preserve jobs, and will always prefer to attack those sectors that don't have a lobbying power over government, which are precisely the high productivity ones.
Yeah, that's true. And if you consider the Nordic welfare model, for example, it's the job of the government to save those who fall, like through the let's say, fail in the economy. You know, that's the idea of social security. And if governments start to run corporations, it's against their, like in the Nordic welfare model, for example, it's against their mandate to let the corporations fail. So it's just the worst idea in every retrospect to give any more power to governments to guide our economies or choose the corporations and that. And like with the recovery fund, which unfortunately was passed also in Finland, and what you have been very critical on too. It will create a swath of unproductive projects which will eventually fail and be a burden to the economy and the governments too, and the workers and all. So it's not really, it's not the job of the government to create economic growth or create jobs. It's the job of the government to, issue the rule of law and stuff like that. And that's what governments are here for. And now we're completely forgetting that, and all the lessons from this, socialistic economic experiments. We have so many in Europe, and also elsewhere. And I just wondered, why is it that everybody seems to want safety instead of prosperity? Why is that? Because
they take prosperity for granted. Because they believe that prosperity came from out of the blue. No, that is the big problem.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's a problem of the education system and also the media, that they should explain what's the reason we have reached this prosperity. It's not because of the government. It's the hardworking people and corporations and risk. That's how we got here.
Absolutely. You mentioned the European Recovery Fund, no? And it's almost a consensus out there to hear that it's going to be great, that it's a fantastic opportunity for the European Union, and that because it's driven to digitalization, clean energy, etc., and all these things. But you've mentioned it a few times, and I think it's an important driver. We have low interest rates, massive liquidity, and precisely in digitalization technology, disruptive technologies, and renewable, there is plenty of available capital. There is absolutely no need for this recovery fund. So the logic behind it, the fact that it needs to be subsidized by government and directed by government, aims at non-productive, non-real economic return projects. And as such, it can create a very aggressive burden on the economy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's exactly how it goes. We have so much liquidity sloshing around. Corporations can borrow at very low rates, and they have certainly made every digital and environmental investment they see fit. So all the recovery fund does, it creates a EU layer of debt, and it gives to projects which will eventually fail. But we know what's the real reason for the recovery fund. It's the creation of the European Fiscal Union.
Yeah,
which they want to bribe to keep the Italy in Europe. That's basically how it goes, and it's like we have been on this road since 2011.
Yeah.
when we should have, not let the second Greece bailout go through and enforce the no bailout rule and stuff like that. And then we would have seen how many countries can be in the Eurozone, and the Eurozone would have become functionable. But this is the worst road. We go to a fiscal kind of a transfer union without a political union. It's a monstrosity. And and combining like the Spanish and Finnish political systems will be just chaos. It cannot happen. It just doesn't work. We're in very different worlds. So I think the EU and the Euro has been, we're on crossroads in that sense, where the recovery fund is a kind of a desperate effort to create a fiscal union without the democratic backing of the Europeans.
Yeah,
and that's a big risk. I think now the fund is true. I think they will try to make it permanent, or they will try to increase its size. I think the first propositions will probably come within a few months. But the thing is that the Finnish Parliament has been tied there the decision that the recovery fund is one time temporary, and the decision that our Parliament made cannot be used to create a permanent facility on increase its size. So we kind of created a backstop, and I don't see how the Finnish Parliament could go over that. And if there's another fund, an increase in it needs to be voted in Finland with 2/3 of a majority. And I think so. So I think the thing is that, well, we'll see how it goes, but the general idea of trying to, so this is kind of a democratic way to do it, like we did in Finland. We had a decent discussion, which is actually, I was very big figure of getting going here. But the thing is that it went through so like in unnoticeable fashion in most of Europe, which was really scary. Because if you really you understand what are they trying to push here. And it's really like this fiscal union and kind of road to federalization of Europe. And you can only do that by asking the people. And there was not a single referendum anywhere. So it's a kind of stealth operation of federalization. But like the Finns have thrown a few stones before that plan. So we'll see how it goes. But it's a dangerous concept anyway, because it doesn't create really an economic benefit, and it's also very problematic otherwise. So it is a very bad thing.
One of the messages that we constantly hear in Southern Europe is that the reason why the Eurozone is not recovering as fast or as strongly as other economies is because the size of the stimulus package is not large enough, and because the European Recovery Fund is not large enough. And one of the fallacies of the current economic conversation is precisely that, is that stimulus plans are never analyzed from the perspective of their effectiveness or where they've gone to or what they're doing, but the size. They say, oh, no, the US has done more, therefore we have to do more. And then the US looks at Europe, they say they've done more, so we have to do more. And it's simply a question of size, no? What would you say to the people that basically say that if the stimulus plan doesn't work and the economy starts dropping, then what we need to do is simply add another stimulus plan?
Well, look, the Eurozone basically entered into a recession in the turn of the year 1920. We had a very long, especially in the US, a very long expansion. So expansions, well, recessions come after expansions. We're heading there already. And now we're trying to, with the coronavirus, hit and all, we're trying to sustain a economic kind of momentum, which was already poised to decline. And this is a violent operation, which will just create more imbalances. So this is we have to, I think that's one of the things we have forgotten, that economies are cyclical. Economic growth accelerates growth. And we were in the end we are heading in the deceleration phase. And suddenly all this, you can throw all your money into the stimulus if you all the governments, they can issue everything they can do, but they cannot fix the thing that economies need these recessions from time to time to, to purify the, not unproductive or unprofitable projects. And this is something that needs to happen. And now we have been forcing keeping the companies, banks, all alive with this massive stimulus. So there is not enough stimulus in the world to keep this economy from turning around. It just makes everything worse.
I think that is a very important point. I read the other day from a politician in Europe saying we're going to bring the Eurozone back to the pre-pandemic growth. We forget that Germany was in technical recession already at the end of 2019, and that Italy and France were with 0% growth on the fourth quarter of 2019. This idea that economic cycles are a thing of the past and that they will and can be managed via monetary policy and fiscal policy is very popular right now. We remember when Janet Yellen said, we will never see a financial crisis ever again, no? How do we say to people that economic cycles can be disguised but not changed by government spending and monetary stimulus?
A very good question. I don't know how can it be shown or made clear to people. Yeah. We just have to understand that I think the whole world, not just economy, everything goes in cycles. Economy is no different. People go in cycles. Everything goes in cycles basically. So why is economy any different?
Absolutely.
I think the only thing is that people will understand when the zombie companies will start failing, I think, and the financial markets crash. I think that's the point when we need to have this discussion and explain thoroughly that this is why we end up here.
Yeah.
And I think after that people will understand. But as long as central banks keep their jargon up that this is we are doing this and that and inflation is transitory and blah blah blah. The media is buying that, everybody's buying that, and there's not really learning happening. But I think when the crash comes, then we need to explain to people that we need to understand that they need to understand the cyclicality of all, and just everything goes in cycles also in economy. So that's I think that's the path forward in this education-wise.
I always say to people that if cycles could be managed and government spending and monetary stimulus were the solution to manage cycles, Argentina and Venezuela would be the richest countries in the world. And
that's true.
and it's not happening. I think that
just to, if I add there, if you just think of the history of Soviet Union.
Absolutely.
There were no cycles, but how horrible was that?
Yeah. So, there were no cycles, but poverty. No, there were no. The only economic cycle was abject poverty, which leads us to another thing, which is that people tend to forget, and that goes back to why people ignore the risk to prosperity. No, people tend to forget that the natural state of the human being is not wealth, but abject poverty. No, I said this to Yanis Varoufakis in a YouTube conversation recently. Is that no, people are the general state of the human being is not wealth, is poverty. And what we do is take people out of poverty. Poverty is not an abnormality. Poverty is where you get to when you forget economic cycles.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Yeah. That's a very good line. Yeah, people tend to forget that. The wealth is like in like a nation state. It's rather new thing. How long have we really been wealthy? It's a few decades, and the economic history is 5,000 years long. So,
one of the things that I wanted to finalize with is in most of the countries of our viewers, every time that somebody wants to give a model of something that truly works and that is great and that is a perfect system, they talk about the Nordic countries. You're in a Nordic country. Tell us what we're missing and what and why that argument in a place like the United States or the United Kingdom or elsewhere is not replicable.
Well, the Nordic welfare state, it needs to something that needs to grow with the economy and the culture, and all the things that the bureaucratic burden is very low, and you can trust the governments and the officials to do what they want. They do what is right, not what they want, do what is right. So, but currently the situation in Finland is actually not really good. We have a social democratic government, and they have invented the idea, it seems, that the debt doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Again, so we are in a very slippery slope here. And the thing is that you cannot export the Nordic welfare model. It has to be grown into. So the US is just, I've been saying to many of my US colleagues, you cannot aim for the Nordic welfare model. It doesn't work in your country for a multitude of reasons. So it's just something that you cannot, you can grow into it, but every country needs to have their own model of how what's the union of government and the corporation. We have managed to do it quite properly, quite good actually, but now it's not looking good at the moment. So we'll see how it goes.
An important thing that you just said that our viewers may forget when they talk about the Nordic model is that one thing is that there is a welfare state, and another completely different thing is that government per se and the bureaucratic system per se have very little power. That is a critical thing.
Yep, that's a critical thing. Yeah.
And because when in the Southern European countries, in the United States, when they talk about the Nordic model, they think that it means bloated government and bloated administration, and it is actually the opposite.
It's the opposite. Yeah, that's a very good clarification. That's exactly how it goes. Mm-hmm. So in a small government, in the sense that they don't try to meddle everything. They just keep you. They just provide the thing that if everything falls apart, there's a support for you economically and otherwise. Mm-hmm. That's how it goes. Like if you look at the budget of our government, there's very high share of pensions and social welfare compensations, and that's very very typical to a Nordic welfare model. But it's just that we don't use a lot of money to salaries or anything. It goes to to fund people's living expenses. But the thing is that there's also now after we had a banking crisis in the early 1990s, there's people who are using the system, so it's not really functioning as it should anymore. So something we need to change the system somehow. Mm-hmm. Exactly why, or how. But it's a renaissance waiting for also the kind of government or the welfare state here. So we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. And also to remind our viewers, Nordic countries are not socialist. They are leaders in economic freedom. They have a very very strong private sector, and coming back, and the government does not decide on the things that they manage. They simply administer them. Very big difference.
That's not the point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tuomas, we've spent an hour talking. I think that we will resume this chat in the not too distant future, because Tuomas is somebody that you have to follow. Everyone that's watching, you get all his details in the description of the video below. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think it's been, there's a lot of things to take away from this conversation, and it's worth reading your material because it's truly well written and very well documented. Thank you very much, Tuomas, for your time. And
thanks.
Have a great day.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your comments below, and keep defending freedom. Thank you very much.